There were 7 people in that room. My mother, my 2 brothers, my aunt, 3 cousins,
and me.
They had called it a family meeting. They had ordered lunch. They had even made small talk before my uncle cleared his throat and said, "We've made a decision about the estate." I remember the way the afternoon light came through the blinds. I remember thinking, this is fine. This is family. Then I watched every single hand go up. Everyone, except mine. And my mother, my own mother, didn't look at me once. Not once. I sat in that chair for 11 more minutes without saying a single word, because I had already decided, not what I would say, what I would do. And I had all the time in the world to do it right. Let me tell you about my family. On the surface, perfect. My grandfather built a construction company from nothing in 1971. By the time he died, it was worth $18 million. He left everything to my grandmother. She left everything to the family. And the family, my family, left everything to greed. I am the middle child of 3. My older brother Marcus is loud, charming, and has never finished anything he started. My younger brother Dale is quiet, watchful, and has never started anything that wasn't someone else's idea. I am the one who worked. I joined my grandfather's company at 22. I worked 12-hour days while Marcus played golf with clients and Dale processed paperwork he didn't understand. I restructured 3 divisions. I brought in 2 major contracts that kept the company solvent during years Marcus nearly bankrupted it with bad decisions. I did this for 11 years. I did this without complaint. I did this because I believed family meant something. The meeting was called 6 weeks after my grandmother's funeral. My mother, Eleanor, said it was to discuss the estate distribution. She said everyone needed to be present. She said it was important. I wore a gray blazer. I brought a notepad. I drove 40 minutes to my childhood home believing I was walking into a conversation. I was not walking into a conversation. I was walking into a verdict. The dining room table had been cleared except for a single folder in front of my uncle Raymond, my mother's brother, who had been appointed executor of my grandmother's estate. Raymond was not a warm man. He opened the folder without greeting anyone. He said, "After careful consideration of the estate and the wishes of the family, a decision has been made regarding distribution." I noticed he said the family, not your grandmother, not the will, the family. I felt something shift in the room before he said another word. He explained that my grandmother's will have been updated 14 months before her death. He explained that the updated will contained a discretionary clause, meaning the family could vote on how assets were divided. He explained that a meeting had already been held. I looked up from my notepad. What meeting? Raymond didn't blink. A preliminary meeting. To discuss concerns. I wasn't at a preliminary meeting.
No, he said.
You weren't. The room was very quiet. I turned to my mother. She was looking at the table. Raymond continued. He said the family had concerns about my role in the company. He said there were questions about certain financial decisions. He said, and I remember this word for word, there is a feeling that the distribution of assets should reflect the family's comfort level with each beneficiary. Comfort level. I had given 11 years, and they had reduced me to a comfort level. Raymond asked if anyone wished to speak before the vote. Nobody spoke. He called the vote. All in favor of the revised distribution, which excludes Eleanor's daughter from the primary estate, please raise your hand. 7 hands. My mother's hand. Marcus's hand. Dale's hand. All of them. Every single one. I counted them the way you count things when your mind needs something mechanical to hold on to.
1, 2,
3,
4,
5, 6, 7. I put my pen down on my notepad very carefully. I picked up my bag. I stood up, and I said, quietly, evenly, without a single tremor in my voice, "Thank you for including me today." Then I walked out. I drove exactly 4 blocks before I pulled over. I sat in my car on a residential street with my hands on the wheel. I didn't cry. I thought. I thought for a long time. Because here is what my family didn't know. What they couldn't have known. What I had never told anyone in that room. 3 weeks before my grandmother died, she had called me privately. She had asked me to come alone. And she had told me something that changed everything about that meeting I had just sat through. Something that meant the vote, all 7 hands, meant absolutely nothing. My grandmother's name was Ruth. Ruth Elaine Calloway. She was 81 years old when she died, and she was the sharpest person I have ever known. She didn't miss things. She never missed things. And in the last weeks of her life, when everyone else was busy calculating what they would inherit, Ruth was watching. She called me on a Thursday evening. She said, "Come alone. Don't tell your mother." I drove to her house, and she was sitting in her chair by the window, the way she always sat. Small. Still. Completely in control of every room she had ever occupied. She didn't waste time. She said, "I know what they're planning." I sat down slowly. "What do you mean?" She looked at me the way she always looked at me, like she was reading something written behind my eyes. "Your uncle Raymond has been meeting with your mother for 6 months. They've been talking to an estate attorney. Not mine. Their own." She reached beside her chair and handed me a folder. Inside were printed emails. Emails between Raymond and my mother. Emails discussing the discretionary clause. Emails discussing how to frame the concerns about my financial decisions. Emails discussing, in plain language, how to remove me from the inheritance I had earned. My mother had written, "She'll make a scene, but she'll get over it. She always does." I read that sentence 3 times. She always does. 36 years of being the one who got over things. The one who showed up. The one who worked. The one who got over it. I looked at my grandmother. She looked back at me without apology because she wasn't apologizing for them.
She was arming me.
"The discretionary clause is real," she said. "Raymond had my attorney at it. I signed it because I was tired, and he told me it was standard language."
She paused.
"But I am not without options. And neither are you." She told me what she had already done. 3 days before that conversation, quietly, privately, through her own attorney that Raymond didn't know about, Ruth had transferred the single most valuable asset of the entire estate. Not money, not property. The company. My grandfather's construction company. 49% of it transferred directly into my name. Legally.
Completely.
Irrevocably. The remaining 51% stayed in the estate, subject to the family vote. But 49% of an $18 million company cannot be voted away. It cannot be redistributed. It cannot be touched. Ruth had done this before Raymond could move. Before the discretionary clause could apply. Before the preliminary meeting I hadn't been invited to. I sat in her living room and I stared at the transfer documents. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She smiled, small and precise. "Because you would have tried to fix it."
To talk to them.
To make peace. She was right. I would have. "Now it's done," she said. "And there's nothing to fix. There is only what comes next." She made me promise one thing. She said, "Don't show them immediately. Let them have their meeting. Let them vote. Let them feel like they won."
Why?
She looked out the window. "Because people who believe they've won stop being careful." She died 11 days later. And I kept my promise. I sat in that dining room and I watched 7 hands go up and I said thank you and I walked out. I let them feel like they had won. For 3 weeks I didn't call anyone. I didn't respond to Marcus's cheerful text asking if I was doing okay. I didn't respond to Dale's voicemail saying he hoped there were no hard feelings. I didn't respond to my mother's single message which said simply, "This was the right decision for the family." I used those 3 weeks wisely. I hired an attorney. Not just any attorney. The same attorney my grandmother had used for the transfer. A woman named Patricia Sohn, 60 years old, who had handled corporate law for 30 years and who looked at me across her desk and said, "Your grandmother told me you'd be coming. She said to tell you, don't rush. Build it correctly." I almost smiled for the first time in weeks. Ruth had prepared for this conversation too. Patricia laid out what I already owned. 49% of Calloway Construction. Which meant I owned 49% of every contract, every asset, every piece of equipment, every ongoing project, which meant nothing moved without my signature. which meant the company my family had just voted to cut me out of could not legally operate without me. Marcus didn't know this yet. Dale didn't know this yet. Raymond, who had orchestrated the entire meeting, didn't know this yet. They were celebrating, and I was filing paperwork. Then Patricia slid one more document across the desk. She said, "Your grandmother also wanted you to have this." It was a second folder. Inside it was something I had not expected. Something that didn't just change my position in the company. Something that changed everything I thought I knew about why Raymond had worked so hard to push me out. I opened the folder, and I understood immediately. This was never about the inheritance. This was about what I would find if I ever started looking. The second folder contained 3 things: a series of bank statements, a contract dated 9 years ago, and a photograph of Raymond shaking hands with a man named Victor Hale. I knew that name. Everyone in the construction industry knew that name. Victor Hale ran a competing firm, Hale and Associates, that had been trying to absorb smaller regional companies for years. I stared at that photograph for a long time. Patricia watched me process it. Then she said, "Look at the contract date. 9 years ago. 9 years ago, I had been working at Callaway Construction for 2 years. 9 years ago, Marcus had nearly bankrupted us with a failed commercial development deal. I remembered that period. I remembered the stress, the emergency meetings, the months where payroll was genuinely uncertain. I remembered Raymond stepping in. He had told the family he was using personal funds to stabilize the company. He had been celebrated for it. My grandmother had called him the family's guardian. I looked at the contract. Raymond hadn't used personal funds. He had made a deal with Victor Hale, a private agreement, completely hidden from the family, in which Hale and Associates provided emergency capital to Callaway Construction. In exchange for what? I turned the page. In exchange for first rights of acquisition. Meaning, if Callaway Construction was ever sold, Victor Hale had the legal right to buy it first, at a price set 9 years ago. A price that was now worth less than a third of the company's current value. Raymond had secretly promised our family's company to a competitor for a fraction of what it was worth. And he had spent 9 years making sure nobody looked closely enough to find it. That's why he needed me gone. Not because of my financial decisions. Not because of family comfort levels. Because I was the one person in that company who understood the numbers well enough to eventually find this. I was the threat. I had always been the threat. And the vote, all 7 hands, had been Raymond's way of removing me before I ever looked in the right direction. I sat with that knowledge for a long moment. Patricia was quiet. She understood what silence was worth in a room like this. Finally, I said, "Does this contract hold legally?" She paused carefully. "It's complicated." The contract was signed by Raymond as a family representative, but he had no formal authority to make acquisition agreements without board approval. There was no board approval.
"No," she said.
There wasn't. So, the contract is fraudulent. She chose her next word precisely. Contestable. I closed the folder. I thought about Marcus, celebrating with his golf friends. I thought about Dale, leaving voicemails about hard feelings. I thought about my mother, writing emails about how I always got over things. I thought about Raymond, sitting somewhere comfortable and satisfied, believing the threat had been neutralized. I looked at Patricia. How long to build a full case? Done correctly? She folded her hands. 8 months. Build it, I said. I went home, and I did something that surprised even me. I called Marcus. I was warm. I was easy. I asked about his kids. He was relieved, you could hear it, that I wasn't making things difficult. He said, "I'm glad you're okay." "I really am." This was just business. Just business. I said, "I understand completely." And I did. I understood far better than he knew. Over the following months, I did 3 things simultaneously. I continued showing up to work. I signed the documents that needed my signature because nothing moved without me, and I said nothing about why. I let Raymond believe my silence was defeat. And I watched. I watched Raymond take meetings with Victor Hale's representatives. I watched him begin quietly preparing the company for acquisition. I watched him move assets in ways that only made sense if a sale was already decided. He was accelerating. He was afraid the window was closing.
He just didn't know why.
Then, 7 months into Patricia's case, something happened that I hadn't planned for. Dale called me. Not a voicemail this time. A real call. Late at night. His voice was different.
Tight.
Careful. He said, I need to talk to you about Raymond. I kept my voice completely neutral. What about him? Long pause. I found something in the company files. Something that doesn't make sense. Dale, quiet, watchful Dale, had been looking. And he had found the edge of the same thread I had been pulling for 7 months. I had 2 choices in that moment. Bring him in, or keep him out. I thought about his hand going up at that table. I thought about no hard feelings. I thought about what Ruth had said. People who believe they've won stop being careful. Dale had voted against me. But Dale had also just called me instead of Raymond. That meant something. I made my decision. Come to my office tomorrow, I said. Come alone. Don't tell Raymond. The silence on his end told me everything. He already knew something was very wrong. And he was more afraid of Raymond now than he was of me. Dale came to my office at 8 a.m. He looked like he hadn't slept. He sat across from me and he put a USB drive on my desk without saying a word. I plugged it in and it contained emails. Internal company emails between Raymond and Victor Hale's legal team. Emails discussing the acquisition timeline. Emails discussing how to handle the minority shareholder, which was me. Once the sale was finalized, one email from Raymond read, she won't fight it. She was removed from the estate cleanly. She has no idea what she holds. I turned the monitor toward Dale. He read it. Then he looked at me, and I watched the moment he understood. She was removed cleanly. Raymond hadn't just orchestrated the family vote. Raymond had designed it specifically to make me feel powerless. To make me feel like I had already lost everything. So I wouldn't look. So I wouldn't fight. So I wouldn't realize that what my grandmother had given me wasn't just a stake in a company. It was a weapon, loaded and ready, hidden in plain sight. Dale's voice was very quiet. How long have you known? 8 months, I said. He closed his eyes.
The vote, he said.
I didn't know about the Hale contract. Raymond told us you had been mismanaging funds. He showed us documents. Fabricated documents, I said. He didn't argue, because he had spent the last several weeks looking at real documents, and he already knew. I gave him a choice. I told him what Patricia had built. I told him about the fraudulent acquisition contract. I told him about the legal exposure Raymond had created. Not just for himself, but potentially for every family member who had participated in the vote, including Marcus, including my mother, including Dale. His face went very still. What are you going to do? I looked at him for a long moment. That depends, I said, on what you do next. He nodded slowly. He understood the offer. He picked up his phone and called Raymond. He told Raymond he had found some concerning files and needed an urgent meeting. He told Raymond to come to the office that afternoon. He told Raymond to come alone, and I called Patricia. I called 2 members of the company's legal board, and I called 1 journalist, a woman I had known for years who covered regional business and white-collar fraud. Not to go public, not yet, just to be present, just a witness. Raymond arrived at 2 p.m. He walked into the conference room expecting Dale. He found me. I was sitting at the head of the table. Patricia was to my left. The legal board members were seated along the wall. Raymond stopped in the doorway, and I watched something move across his face. Surprise first, then calculation, then, when he saw Patricia, something that looked almost like fear. Almost. He was still Raymond. He recovered quickly. He smiled. He said, "Well, this is unexpected." I said, "Sit down, Raymond." Saturday, I opened the folder. I slid the original acquisition contract across the table. I slid the bank statements. I slid the emails, including the one that described removing me cleanly. He looked at each document. His smile faded with each page. When he reached the last document, he looked up at me. His voice was careful and controlled. "These can be explained." "I know," I said. "Your attorney can explain them to a judge." Silence. Patricia spoke then, precise and unhurried. She outlined the legal exposure, fraudulent acquisition agreement, breach of fiduciary duty, potential elder financial abuse given the circumstances of my grandmother's signature. She outlined what a full investigation would find. She outlined what the company's board was legally required to do once formally notified. She outlined, very quietly, that notification had already been filed that morning. Raymond looked at me across the table. The calculation in his eyes had become something else now, something smaller. "What do you want?" he said. And there it was, 0.8 months of patience, 0.11 years of work, a lifetime of being the one who got over things. All of it compressed into that one question from a man who had raised his hand against me in my grandmother's dining room. Did I lean forward? "I want full disclosure to the family of everything you did. Every email, every meeting, every document. I want them to hear it from you, not from me." "And the company?" "The Hale contract will be voided through the courts. The company stays in the family. And me." I looked at him for a long moment. "You resign. Quietly. Today." He wanted to negotiate. I could see it. The instinct was still there. Patricia placed one final document on the table. "The alternative," she said, "is that we proceed with full legal action tomorrow morning." Raymond looked at the document. He looked at me. He picked up the pen. He signed. He stood without another word. He walked to the door. Then he stopped. He turned back, and he said, quietly, without looking directly at me, "Ruth knew, didn't she? She knew everything."
I said.
"She always did." He left. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then Patricia looked at me and said, "Your grandmother would have enjoyed that." I think she would have. That evening I drove to my mother's house. I sat across from Eleanor in the same living room where I had grown up. I told her everything about the Hale contract, about Raymond's fabricated documents, about the emails, about the vote she had cast based on lies she had chosen not to question. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "I didn't know about the contract." "I know," I said. "But you knew something was wrong," I said. "And you raised your hand anyway." She didn't answer, because there was no answer. Only the truth of a woman who had chosen comfort over her own daughter, who had chosen the path of least resistance, who had looked at the table instead of at me. I didn't scream at her. I didn't cry. I stood up and I said, "I'm not going to destroy this family, Eleanor. That was never the point." Then what was the point? I picked at my bag. "The point was that you needed to know, all of you needed to know, that I was never the one you should have been comfortable removing." I drove home. I sat in my kitchen in the quiet. I thought about Ruth, small and still in her chair by the window, watching, knowing, preparing. She had spent her final days not grieving, not resting, arming the one person she trusted to use it correctly. And I thought about what revenge actually feels like. It doesn't feel like fire. It doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like a door closing very quietly, like finally putting something down that you carried for too long, like walking out of a room, and this time, not looking back. She raised her hand against her own daughter. Not out of hatred. Out of comfort. Out of choosing the easier thing. And that somehow is worse. So here is what I need you to sit with tonight. If someone who loves you hurts you, not out of malice, but out of weakness, is that easier to forgive? Or is it actually harder? Because they knew better. And they chose comfort anyway.